the broad goal, I guess, is to introduce market research, give an overview of common methods, and just give you a flavour of this domain, of career options. So, it's just one other kind of thing to consider that, you could possibly end up doing. And there obviously are organisations who do offer placements like Forethought and so on. So in terms of my background and how it relates to market research, when I was doing my Masters of Org Psych, I did 2 placements in the market research setting. One was actually at Forethought when it was previously called Roberts Research. So that was an intensive qualitative research study. So essentially, actually they sort of mix up the qual and the quant in a sense. So that was doing what they call depth interviews. So you're basically talking on the phone with some of the really high-value business-to-business customers. So, you say you've got a company like the Commonwealth Bank, and they have, a multi-million-dollar kind of relationship with, say, a phone company or an Australia Post or a Telstra or something like this, and this would be a business-to-business kind of market research where you really wanted to check that their individual relationship with that client is working. So that was the experience there, doing a lot of one-on-one kind of depth interviews where you're really, the organisation was employing was really interested in knowing specific things that they could do to manage their very big relationship better. And then the second role was a bit more diverse, so that was perhaps a little bit like Johan. There was a lady, Susanna Roth, who just started a market research company called Rothcore after working, I don't know what it was, 10, 15 years at a market research company. So she was probably like head of some section of that company. She went out on her own and started up her own business. And yeah, I did a placement there when she was just starting that up in a sort of first or second year of that company. So I believe now they've got offices on St Kilda Road, but back then it was pretty much working out of her, quite luxurious apartment, essentially, as the business sort of got up and running. But yeah, we did a whole range of roles, from experimental studies, taste testing type studies, large-scale tracking studies of job satisfaction, tracking customer satisfaction over time, to depth interviews, also comparison of product integrations and so on. So I'll talk about a few of those examples. So yeah, quite an interesting area, very high, very fast-paced. You're used to doing a thesis over a couple of years. In market research, from getting a brief to delivering a report to the client, it could be weeks. So yeah, you really got to get good at making those PowerPoint decks quickly. You've got to get quick at really powering through things, but at the same time maintaining that rigor. So yeah, today I wanted to talk about market research, give an introduction, talk about sampling, some general points, and then talk about some very common methods, so focus groups, depth interviews, as well as surveys, experiments, and choice modelling. So give you a quick overview of do's and don'ts in those areas, as well as give you a flavour of careers. In terms of definitions, this is from the American Marketing Association. I guess market research is a way of generating information that helps organisations or whoever the client might be. It could be government or it could be not-for-profits, whatever. Identify opportunities, identify problems, and basically refine marketing actions. So it allows them to monitor the market, how many people are interested in their products, how satisfied are people with the products, how much awareness is there in the market of your particular brand versus other brands, what do people think of your latest release, what are the problems, the benefits, how could your products be improved, all those kind of things. One of the big things to take away from marketing research is that the process of marketing research is everything that you should be familiar with from all your experiences doing research already. So you've done a fourth year thesis at some point, you've written 1,000,001 lab reports, you're doing a thesis right now. That research process is exactly the same in market research. No different. You've got to define your research question, why that is important. You've got to work out what data might help you in answering that research question and design a study. A lot of the time you'll have to get some participants, so you'll have to sample some people from some population, define some measurement tools, perhaps a survey or an experimental protocol, collect the data, process it, analyze it, write up a report and communicate those results. So in that sense, market research is really building on the skills you have already. And furthermore, in psychology, we develop models of human behavior. We develop models of attitudes, cognitions, beliefs of human behavior. And that's really the essence of consumer behavior. Well, consumers are people. Of course. Consumers are people and they have motivations and desires and wants and needs. And so market research is all about modeling human behavior in relation to purchasing and sales and so on. One of the major kind of aims of today is to get you thinking about how you would choose a methodology given a research question. So, if you were told by an organisation, look, we really want to understand how satisfied people are with our product. What design would you use? How would you approach that? Would you use a survey or a focus group or a depth interview and so on? So I think this lecture was posted, or at least a video version, but some key distinctions to keep in mind in market research: primary versus secondary, qualitative versus quantitative, experimental, non-experimental. So primary research is data that is collected with the explicit purpose of answering your research question. Secondary data is data that already exists, was collected for some other reason, and you're going to analyze it. Qualitative is obviously, data collection tools that involve, it's more about characteristics and features and less about numbers. So things like qualitative questions, open-ended questions, depth interviews, focus groups, much less structured. Quantitative is usually closed-ended, and so then we've got experimental, non-experimental. So, if you're doing an observational study, a survey, observing depth interviews and so on, that's non-experimental. If you're manipulating something, showing people two different types of product and getting their ratings, that's experimental. Okay, so let's talk about secondary data analysis. When would you do it? What are the typical examples? Some examples that I've seen when doing market research are things like supermarkets and various companies provide aggregate sales statistics. So if you wanted to know how well your product is doing in the market, you can subscribe to various data sources from supermarkets and see, how much is my product selling at the supermarket, at the 7-Elevens, at the milk bars and so on. You get a breakdown of your product as well as competing products. Equally, you might have some sort of complaint system that's used to manage complaints about your product, and that's used to manage customer satisfaction directly, but you could perhaps extract information from that to identify ways that you could improve your products and so on. Likewise, you might consult ABS statistics to look at, the size of a market. What's the population in Australia, how many males there are, females, and so on. Another area that's quite sort of innovative at the moment is looking at various social media streams and trying to extract content. So, there's attempts to look at Twitter feeds to extract brand perceptions and so on. So yeah, there's all sorts of external data sources that may be useful, but often they're less targeted to your specific needs. They can be cheaper, but that depends. You know, if you're buying really good quality archival sort of sources related to sales, that could still be expensive. And you may have to process this extensively to actually get some stuff that's useful. More generally, in marketing research, you're given a brief to collect some new data. Often you're an external organisation and you've tendered for a contract from some company. Often even just to get onto the list of market research companies that are allowed to tender, that can take a lot of work. So yeah, it can be actually quite competitive to get on the tender shortlist for, say, a big organisation, a big bank or a big telecommunication company that's got lots of market research needs. So you might want to get onto that tender list, and then you've got the right to tender for a project. And once you've got that project, so you're going to have to do some sort of research project. You're wanting to define your sample. Who are you going to target? In general, it can sort of depend on the nature of the research question, how important that it is to define a particular target population of interest. If you're just doing a taste testing study where you're trying to, say, look at the experimental effect of some manipulation on, I don't know, the amount of nuts in an ice cream or something like that, it might be less essential that you get a perfectly representative sample. You may want to get it representative, but it might not be as essential. Whereas if you're really trying to define what is the customer satisfaction level in the entire population, how does it vary by region or by gender and so on, you might want to take greater care in getting a representative sample of the target population. In general, we can distinguish between census and sample, where census, as we know from say, the general census of Australia, the census targets the entire population, a sample gets a subset. Most of the time you wouldn't be doing a census. The only time you might be doing a census is if you have a small number of, say, customers that are really important and you want to target each one and get some information. Target population refers to obviously the group you're trying to generalise your findings to. So that could be the Australian population or a particular segmented group of interest. When you are sampling participants, you can either do probability or non-probability. So probability is like, we generally think of just a random sample from the population, but it could be some defined probability. And the reason we do probability sampling is we want our sample to be representative of the target population. So we might use methods like random digit dialing, or at least to the extent that you probably have to consult the do not call register these days, given that people are opting out. Or various strategies that attempt to randomly sample a population. Of course, in reality, it's almost impossible to do that perfectly, but you can approach that with various methods that try and randomize across the population. In contrast, non-probability would often be some form of convenience sampling. There's lots of market research providers that have lists of people who have agreed to do focus groups or depth interviews. There's a lot of online panels these days. If anyone's signed up for, I don't know, Cash for Research or whatever it's called, you can sign up and put your name on some sort of online database and you do some little online questionnaire and you get some small token of appreciation. So yeah, there's many methods of recruitment, and I guess, there are a lot of panel options or, cold calling, hanging outside supermarkets, all sorts of options. One issue, I guess, is response rate. So when you do approach people, what percentage of them agree to do it? That can have relevance for the degree to which your sample is representative. And so often, that people will try to offer incentives in order to keep that response rate high in order to maximise representativeness. Another thing to think about is the sample size. If you are doing surveys, then you're trying to quantify things like brand awareness or satisfaction levels with your product and competing products. You may want to know whether a change from 70% satisfaction to 80% satisfaction is meaningful. So in that sense, you do have to think about what level of confidence you want to have in your results. And the more precision you want, then the more people you're going to need. All right, so that's sampling. That's a good little topic, though. Yeah, the ethics of it all, and that's a big thing in this. So yeah, two major qualitative methods that get used a lot in market research. One is depth interviews, and another is focus groups. So yeah, I guess a depth interview is about getting rich qualitative information, usually from one respondent. And typically it's about open-ended questions where you can explore the hows, the whys, the wheres, the whens, and the whys. Not too whys. Of decision-making, of reasons, and so on. So it's about getting a richer picture of knowledge. And that's probably true of qualitative methods in general, that if you already know the question and the possible answers, then maybe qualitative's not right. You know, if you're trying to say, well, how satisfied are you with this product on a 1 to 5 scale, then you don't really need to do a depth interview. You can just get people ticking boxes. Depth interviews are more about, you know, how do you think this product could be improved? How would you describe your experience with the product? How did you discover this product? Take me through the journey of you purchasing this product. How did you weigh up competing products? How did you learn about this product? So it's much richer information, I think, is where qualitative is really useful. And in particular, you know, you could ask closed-ended questions on a survey, but if you've got a skilled interviewer, I think they can elicit more from a potential respondent. They can probe for more information and so on. Generally, when you're doing this, you have an interview guide that sort of sets out the flow of the interview and gives a little bit of structure. You generally, with the consent of the respondent, record it. It probably takes some notes. It does require a bit more skill to probe effectively. And in particular, I noticed, first-time interviewers, it really does take a while to learn how to not ask leading questions and not try and push the interviewee down a particular path, but actually just get people to kind of continue their thoughts in an open-ended way. Yeah. A second qualitative method that gets used a lot in market research is focus groups. I know when I was going through uni, I had my name on those market research lists. I think I probably sat through maybe 10 or 12 of them over the years. And yeah, so basically the idea is you've got maybe 6 to 12 people in a room who maybe have something a little bit in common, an interest in a product, an awareness of a product category. You've got a moderator. Generally, you've got some double-sided windows in case the client wants to sit in and watch. And you've got a moderator's guide. Well, the moderator does anyway, which once again gives a broad structure. You can only discuss so much in a focus group, so it goes for an hour. And the real kind of rationale for a focus group is that you can get people feeding off each other, and you can start to look for consensus in a group around how they feel about a product or how they think about it, get people's responses to new initiatives, new naming ideas, new videos, advertisements, and so on. And generally, you've got to think about your incentives to get people to come into a room. You might have to offer them $50, $100. I'm not sure what the going rate is these days. And hopefully they're sort of in some way knowledgeable in the way that you want about a product. So yeah, the advantages of focus groups is it is good for generating new ideas or looking at the reasons for behaviour. In some contexts where you're interested in specific people, it can actually get the clients involved, the customers involved. Clients can also watch these things through the double-sided windows, which can be quite exciting for them to really see their customers and their responses. Yeah. The challenges of it, of course, is that qualitative focus groups aren't always generalizable. You can imagine you get a group of people, you can get a bit of groupthink. The sample sizes are usually small because they're expensive to run. So there are questions of reliability and even just if you can imagine, you run a bunch of focus groups, you've got to write a report. Synthesizing all these comments and stuff is quite a subjective process, so it can be quite challenging. All right, so that's qualitative. Now let's look at some quantitative methods. So probably the most commonly used market research tool is a survey. Organizations do use surveys. So the classic ones that I've seen are big companies will have tracking studies going on all the time. You know, your big companies will be wanting to model the health of their brand. You know, how many people know their product and how many people are satisfied with their product is very close to the issue of how many people are purchasing their product. So if there's some issue with how people are no longer satisfied with their product or no longer aware of their product, that's a problem. Or if they're doing initiatives all the time in supermarkets trying pricing strategies, or they're doing various advertising strategies, they're going to want to track over a long period of time how their product is going in terms of awareness of their product, competing products, and looking at satisfaction. So yeah, most big companies will have tracking studies. Every month they're collecting 100 or a couple of hundred or more participants and tracking those kind of issues throughout the year. So you can see why surveys are useful for that, because they try and be representative either through the internet or phone technologies. They're getting large samples using standardized formats. But also you can have one-off projects, of course. The format, I guess, can be face-to-face, telephone, paper, internet. They're all options. I think the internet has really emerged to be a major platform in the last 10 years or so. But you still of course, get a lot of telephone interviews. A lot of the time we'll have closed-ended questions, but you can, of course, ask open-ended questions, intersperse them. That creates a few challenges of processing, but that can be helpful. One of the big things that we did at Rothcore and probably any market research company is pre-testing. And it's probably a lesson you can learn if you're ever doing a thesis and you're designing a survey. Do some pre-testing. You don't want to just roll out a survey and assume it's right. So just to reiterate the importance of pre-testing. So usually what would happen is once you've developed a survey, often if it was a telephone-based, you'd have like what they call a CATI script. It's that computer adaptive telephone interview or something. So you'd have basically a computerized script that would pop up and with questions, and it would often have conditional logic. So if someone says they buy a particular product, then you'd probe on that and so on. So you'd obviously have to do just a lot of testing to check that all the logic and flow worked. But another big thing is just checking that the questions make sense to people. So you get maybe five or six people to actually do the survey, but you might ask different kinds of questions, like saying, when I say, how satisfied are you with product X, what's your natural response? Does this response options I'm giving you make sense? Is that a natural way of answering the question? Do you understand this question? And so on. It's definitely important before you roll out these surveys to hundreds of people and try and draw findings, is to kind of check that everything makes sense. One of my pet peeves, which I see in sort of some research projects, it's probably like a fourth-year student in a mad rush to try and get this thing up and running so they can have some data by the end of the year, but still do these surveys, and the pet peeve is you get some demographics, but the questions don't really make sense. The question doesn't apply to me, or the response options aren't valid, or the response options don't have the response that I need to answer the question. So things like that are really important to pick up. So there's all sorts of tips about do's and don'ts about item writing, and it's a bit of an art, I guess. And certainly pre-testing would hopefully pick up on problematic questions. All right, experiments. It's not something we think about straight away, but there are lots of times when we do experiments in market research. They're really good for answering causal questions. And causal questions come up a lot in market research. You're trying to work out, you've designed 3 different types of packaging, for your Fruit Loops or your cornflakes or whatever. You're trying to work out which one is best. Well, maybe you should either show one package to each of 3 different groups and get them to rate those packages on a bunch of dimensions, and so on. I remember once this is just as a person doing market research, I was invited for a taste testing session where we were tasting beer. They had to split it over 2 sessions because they wanted reliable measurement after like the 4th or 5th beer. But presumably they were applying all sorts of experimental principles. I'm pretty sure they took the labels off the bottles, so they were standardized bottles. They randomized the order of the beer presentation. They gave us little bread things so that it would nullify the order effects associated with the first beer and the second beer. So presumably I was trying to get something, some understanding of taste perceptions of different beers. Another experiment I did once, just as a participant, once again, was we had to eat different ice creams, and I was pretty sure, it was pretty clear that they were manipulating. Sorry?
Yeah.
What's this?
Get us on.
Yeah, they're good, yeah. I'm pretty sure it was some sort of chocolate-coated ice cream with marshmallows and nut kind of thing. And it was pretty clear to me that they were trying to work out what's the optimal quantity of nuts and marshmallows in this ice cream. And so they were each one had slightly more or less, you could tell. I'm pretty sure they were trying to optimize that. And natural thing to do is, administer the different combinations and get the people's responses. Other times I've seen this kind of thing going on where people get sent descriptions of different kinds of credit card offers, and maybe 5 different credit card offers, and see which combination works best. You also see this in advertising testing where people look at ads and rate which one, I guess, how much they like it or whatever. You also see this in the online space a lot. They often call it A/B testing these days, where a lot of websites will do little mini experiments where they randomize the presentation of something, the presentation of an ad in 2 different ways, and see what the click-through rate is, and then whatever version of the ad gets the high click-through rate is the one that lasts. So if anyone just gets ridiculous numbers of, like Game of War or Candy Crush or something like that, probably, the reason why they are as they are is because they've been optimized by a whole series of A/B tests to show that whatever they're doing is pulling people in. So experiments, very good if you're trying to make that kind of causal inference amongst a couple of different competing options. Sort of related to experiment is this notion of choice modeling. It's kind of an experiment, I suppose. It's used specifically for products that have many features, and you're trying to optimize the combination of features. So think about a credit card. A credit card has an interest rate, whether or not it's got like some sort of points program, the annual fee, I don't know, probably a whole bunch of other things really. The brand, whether the color of the card, probably other things. But the point is there's a lot of different features, and some things cost things to the customer, some things cost things to you, interest-free period. So you might want to know what's the optimal combination of product of these features for a given customer group. Similarly, you might think about computers. You've got the processor, the RAM, the screen size, the brand, and so on. You might want to know what combination of features appeals to a customer. Very commonly, price is a major feature as well. So choice modeling is a way of working out what's the optimal combination of features. The general process of this is you define your attributes and levels. So an attribute might be the interest rate, whether there's a loyalty program, what's the interest-free period, and the levels of an attribute will be like 50-day interest-free, 30-day interest-free, no interest-free, and so on. You then create a whole bunch of permutations of products. So you might present, say, 100 different products, all with different combinations. Expose them to a whole bunch of participants and get them to rate or compare. And then you apply a statistical analysis to work out how much, say, people's value of a given product varies across the features. And you should then be able to work out which attributes are more important and what levels give the greatest sort of benefit. And if, so for example, you might learn, the interest-free period is really important, but people will often ignore the fact that it's a 22% credit card interest rate because they'll think they'll be able to pay it off in time, but even if they don't. Or they'll be more excited by being able to transfer their money across and have an interest-free period than they will about something that costs will ultimately cost a lot to them. So yeah, business will try and optimize the product offering based on these utility weights that get extracted out of it's basically kind of like an ANOVA, really, sort of a factorial ANOVA. Okay, so that's a whole pile of methodologies of market research. Once you've done these studies, you've got to write it up. And on the left, we have here the report structure that you might see, or what's described in Lucas's textbook on market research. On the right, we have a lab report / thesis / journal article. Main point here is they're the same, pretty much. Pretty much. Probably the big things to take away from market research reporting is often we would deliver PowerPoint decks, so just literally slide after slide of major findings with maybe little technical notes at the bottom. If you're going to do fancy analyses, generally you've got to describe it at you've got to say what it means to a manager who has no idea what a correlation is, and then probably you'll have a later description for maybe the technical people in the organisation who might be a bit more wanting to check that you've done the right things. So yeah, a big thing with any, I guess, consulting involving market research or opinion surveys or whatever you might be doing is really, you've often got an audience who doesn't know what a correlation is, doesn't know what a regression is. They'll probably understand what a percentage is and what a difference in percentage, and they'll probably understand graphs that go up and down, and that can be a real challenge, and it really often forces you to think about, what does this really mean to the client? What does this utility weight in a choice modelling mean? What does this difference in means satisfaction ratings on some experiment really mean? So yeah, and really translating it to the client's needs. That's the big challenge. As I mentioned at the start, market research, there are kind of the less interesting roles, but if you're interested in it, there are some more interesting roles, I guess. So things like qualitative data analysis specialists. There are quant specialists, although I don't know. The impression I get is there are probably a few like really top-notch quants, but often felt it's not a bad life, but you often feel a bit. I think you get more respect in academia as a quant expert than you do in market research. Probably the big bucks are once you start really being the head of some client relationship, or you're the person who's winning the tenders and overseeing and managing an entire project, managing the interview team and all these sorts of things. So, and I guess that's probably what you saw with Johan in terms of his past experience. He's managing the clients and so on, client relationships. That's probably where you can really bring in your kind of interpersonal skills and consulting skills that org psychs have, as well as you do have that technical side as well that you can bring to bear to back it all up. As well as there's also internal roles. So most market research is outsourced, and so there's always roles in the company in terms of managing that relationship and managing the feeding back of information back to sort of internal stakeholders. So yeah, main message, I guess, is that psychology provides a relevant skill set. Whether it interests you or not is another question. And the key take-home, which I think has more generality than just market research, is about understanding the pros and cons of different research methodologies. If you can work out, okay, the client has a problem, okay, for that I probably should do a survey, or I should do an experiment, or no, this is pretty open-ended, I should do qualitative. And being able to set up that design, I think that's probably one of the key skills that you can think about when you're thinking about how do you transfer your kind of thesis, research methods, design skills into the real world. So yeah, that's probably a key general skill relevant to market research, but also probably in a lot of internal research roles related to org psych.